Okay, here goes, folks. So today we're going to talk about this idea of categorizing people and how we do that. Okay. So and well, can you guys? Well, I'll ask you guys this: if have you guys ever had to fill out a form where it asks like you to like identify your race or ethnicity? How many people have had to do that before? How many people? And for many of you guys, especially people who identify as being of European descent, is that pretty easy to do for the most part? You know, I'll just speak for myself. You know, a lot of times people say my race I would usually consider to be white, right? And then ethnicity, European American. And then there's another way we can categorize people, and that's by nationality, right? My nationality, and usually when you think about nationality, you think about like what passport you have. How many people have a passport? Most of you, okay? Does anybody have a passport that's not an American passport? You do? It's a New Zealand passport. So if you don't mind me, I'm gonna, your nationality, so you are a New Zealand citizen, or can you have both? You have 3 passports. And so your but what's citizenship? What's your citizenship? So you're a New Zealand citizen. What's the other passport? Oh, got it. Okay, the UK, the United States, and New Zealand. So do you sometimes use one passport and sometimes use another, depending on where you're going? Yeah. So by the way, folks, Alex is in a great position because there's some places where if you got an American passport, they're like, hey, we don't really like you so much. So guess what Alex's family is breaking out? They're breaking out the New Zealand passports because you know what? Nobody hates New Zealanders, right? So that's really fortunate for some people. Anyway, let's talk about how we identify people. So how do we know how to categorize people? So one term we use is this term ethnicity. So let's talk about this and what classifies or what is ethnicity. So ethnicity is identity with a group of people who share cultural traditions. And that's usually some like language, but it could also be other cultural traditions of some sort of homeland or hearth. Okay, so ethnicity. And to be clear here, and I'm going to try to like work the tools here. This is going to be a little awkward. The real thing is ethnicity is mostly based on culture. Okay, so I would definitely identify this as being the most important part. Ethnicity is based on culture. Okay. And often people share a language. Now that's not always true, and I'll explain why it kind of changes sometimes depending on your situation, but cultural traditions. Okay, so if I had to say my ethnicity, I would say I am mostly, so, and you guys can do this on your own together, or I mean on your own, I am mostly German. Okay, whoops, what happened? Dang it, mostly German. And with some other Western European ethnicities sprinkled in there. Maybe I've got a little Scottish or something like that. So you can think for yourself right now, what is your ethnicity? And most Americans have some sort of mixed ethnicity. Very few Americans are like what you might consider to have pure ethnicity. And I hate to use the word pure because that's like some sort of term like sounds like Hitler would use. And it's very rare to have what you consider to be 100% one ethnicity. But anyway, ethnicity is all about your cultural traditions, okay? So the next one we want to talk about is another one you guys probably studied, and you guys might have heard about these in other social science settings, but it's race, okay? So race is really an important thing to think about, but with race, it's usually it's based on physical features, okay? Physical features and often skin color, okay? So that's what race is all about, okay? And just to be clear, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, there is no way to accurately, as I spell accurately, categorize, no, that's not how you spell accurately, is it? Accurate. Like that? Can you guys help me? Is that close enough? Accurately categorize by race. And what I mean by that is, well, first of all, what are the races? What do people usually say are like the quote unquote races? Come on, help me, folks. Yeah. Okay, so interestingly, actually, let's think about that. Would Hispanic be a race or an ethnicity? What is the thing that's most noteworthy? Like, what do most people who are considered Hispanic have in common? They speak Spanish. So actually, Hispanic is actually more of an ethnicity, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so this is why race is tricky, right? Because what are generally considered the races? What's the two big ones that you guys have heard about your entire lives? White and black. And what about everybody else? What race do they fall under? Well, I don't know. So for example, so that's the problem with race is that, first of all, there are white and black people down here who speak Spanish, right? There are people who have almost 100% African ancestry in Brazil and in the Caribbean or in the South in the United States. So race is really difficult. And I always tell this story, and if you had me in another class, you probably heard this. My wife is from Australia, and I'd be interested to hear what Alex has to say about this. In Melbourne, Australia, you've ever been to Australia, Alex? Yeah. You've been to Melbourne? You know what ethnic group there's a lot of there, like from European ethnic group, non-English speaking? Maybe you don't know it. There are a lot of Greeks, a lot of Greek people in Melbourne. And my wife was born in Melbourne, and she said when she was born there, she was born in she was the only white baby born in the hospital that day. And I was like, well, what were the rest of the people? Aboriginal Australians or people of African descent? She was like, no, they're Greek. And I said, well, wait a second, Greeks are white. And she said, no, they're not. So a lot of Australians don't consider like Southern Europeans to be white. Spanish, Italians, Greeks, they don't consider them white. So that's what I mean by this idea of race. It's really no way to accurately identify people because there's no way to, like, what are Indian people? What race are they? Can we use race? You can't because they're like in a category kind of under themselves. Or the people of the Middle East. If you ask most people of the Middle East, most Arabs, what race they are, they say white. But I would say most Europeans would not call them white. So anyway, that's why race can be very tricky situation. Okay, and then the last one we want to talk about is the idea, another way of categorizing people, and that's by nationality. So nationality is the identity with a group of people who have a legal attachment to a country. So what that means is it's also thought of as it might be like it's similar to citizenship. Okay, so when I think of nationality, I think of citizenship. So with my ethnicity, I would say I'm mostly German. And then if you want to use the racial terms, I would call myself white. And then as far as nationality, you guys can think about this. I am American. Okay, so I'm from the United States. Anybody not an American citizen feel like sharing that? I don't know. Some people don't feel weird about, I don't know. Okay, so we have lots of people in this school who are not Americans. My wife is not American by citizenship. So those are the different ways of categorizing people. Okay. So with that said, there's lots of, it's often kind of difficult to kind of tease out this idea of when you're talking, because Everett brought up the idea of Hispanic. And so like, it's very difficult sometimes to know if you're talking about a race or an ethnicity. So that can be a little bit confusing, but we'll try to work through it as a group. For example, I usually, well, we'll come back to that later. Okay, so here goes. So on that map, you can see that you guys have seen a similar map to that. It's got all the counties in the United States. We're going to go ahead and look at, and I want you to shade. So you have colored pencils to your right there in those little cups. Where are the people of these different ethnicities or races? So at this point, we're kind of combining the concept of race and ethnicity. Okay, so it gets a little awkward, but that's just kind of how things work sometimes when we're talking about categorizing people. So let's look at this first one. Oh, here I've got this. This just shows how complicated it can get, because if you look at this is from the census. And what happens, this is the old census. And so you'd have to answer these questions. Is this person Hispanic, Latino, or of Spanish origin? And then you'd answer these questions. And then this is more about race. And then get down here, it gets more about like nationality. And so this was like a blending and a mixing of all these different ideas of race, nationality, ethnicity. And so some people said, well, this is really confusing and isn't really helpful. So that's the old way of doing it. And they've actually switched it to the new form. Is more like this. You click, or you don't click. Well, maybe now you do, but you check what race or ethnicity you are, and then you get more specific by writing in which one. So it's a little bit, so here takes into account the fact that there's a lot of variation, but this doesn't necessarily, I guess it gets a little more specific, which is helpful in some ways, but in some ways it's not. So that's just a little reminder there. Okay, so here is the percent. These are Hispanic or Latino people. So the dark green, and that's really all I would pay attention to right now, to shade, the really dark green, is where there's 25% or more Hispanic people. And again, you don't have to get super detailed on this, but I do want you to know, like if I showed you this map, you would need to know which ethnicity or race this was signifying. Okay, so this is Hispanic or Latino. So we can see the primarily there are Hispanic, or that's not a good color. The Hispanic or Latino population is in Texas, up in here to even in Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Okay. Then of course down here in southern Florida, and then there's some pretty significant pockets in eastern Oregon and places like southern Idaho and places like that. So it's important also to note, and we've been talking about this, especially during the migration unit, but why are these people here in these places? And by the way, you guys don't have Puerto Rico on your map. If you want to color it in and label it, you can, but Puerto Rico is almost 100% Hispanic. So why are they where they are? Because this would be, I can imagine this being an important like FRQ question. Why are they there? Yeah, Emma. It's closest to the US-Mexican border. So for here anyway, like here, it would be close to the US-Mexican border, right? And so that makes a lot of sense. But what about some of the other places? What about in Eastern Washington? Any ideas about why there's so many people? Like, what else is going on? Yes, up here in California, it's because they're close to the US-Mexican border, but there's some other things that are going on. It's not necessarily proximity. What else do you guys think? What industry do a lot of Hispanics or Latinos work in? No, you guys have no idea. You guys just don't know, or you guys just want me to tell you? Are they computer programmers for the most part? Have you guys seen that? Do you see a lot of, are most of your teachers Hispanic? Where are Hispanic? What do Hispanics do, you guys? You guys know this, you're just being shy. Okay, there's a lot in construction, absolutely. And maybe I'm making too many assumptions about what you guys know, but they work a lot. They work in agriculture. So where is a lot of agriculture? In this area of California, Eastern Washington, in parts of Oregon, there's a lot of Hispanics because of agriculture, okay? So that explains quite a bit of that, okay? All right, next one. So again, I might ask, oh, and by the way, who are if these people are mostly from Central America, the people down here, from mostly Mexican, but also Guatemalan and from Honduras and places like that, where are most of these people from? There are a lot of, there's a lot of Puerto Ricans, and what other group? How do you spell Puerto Rico? And Puerto Rico and Cuba. Okay, so there's a lot of Puerto Ricans and Cubans. Okay, let's move on. What about the next one? Okay, so this is people who African American. Okay, go ahead and shade those maps. Shade the map for African American. Again, I would just focus on the brightest purple. And again, with race and ethnicity, this gets a little awkward because, you know, we have this term black, which is definitely a race. It's based on skin color. But we also have this term African American, which is an ethnicity because it's based on culture, right? Because there are people who identify as African American who might not even be like dark skinned, right? Do you guys think of any people who don't really have dark skin, but you still think of them as black, who identify as black or African American? Anybody know who the coach of the Dallas Mavericks is? Jason Kidd. Who said that? Avery? Do you think of Jason Kidd as black? Jason Kidd is black. He identifies as black, but his skin is very, very light. So that's why this idea of ethnicity is more is sometimes more appropriate to use, because with ethnicity, you're often self-identifying with your ethnicity. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let's go. Oh, to back up. And so most importantly, why does it look like this? What is why are most African Americans in these places, these places? Yeah, Emma. So I'm sitting by this purifier. Say it again. Yeah, so absolutely. That's the 100% reason. So this is from the legacy of slavery. This is back in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. People of African descent were brought to what becomes the United States, and they were enslaved. So there you go. And then, of course, you see some pockets up here in northern cities, and that's a result. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in the 1920s, especially, a lot of people of African descent started to move out of the South. Okay, so here's the Asian one. And what you can see is that there's really no place in the United States except for right around, what city is that? Los Angeles, that really has a majority of Asians. Or not. Sorry, somebody said Los Angeles. It's not Los Angeles, it's San Francisco. How many people have been to San Francisco? Did you notice that? No. You didn't? No. Oh, when I was there, I definitely know. You mean you didn't notice that there was lots of Asian people? Really? You were in the city? Wow. Okay. I thought it was very noticeable coming from Portland, where there's not very many. Okay. So what is that? I guess if you were talking about geography, excuse me, what is most notable? Like where, if you had to just make it, and by the way, Hawaii has a lot of Asians as well, mostly Japanese. But if you had to make a generalization about where are most of the Asians in this country, where are they? Just in a generalization. Okay, in cities, but also in California. That's great. California, but also cities is a good one. So Asians tend to go to cities and they tend to go to California. Why California? Okay, it's jobs. Well, could be lots of things, but I'm looking for something more obvious. What? It's closer, right? On the West Coast because of proximity. Okay. Let's move on. Here we go. excuse me. So the last one I want to show you is people of Native American descent, or what they're calling in here American Indians. So again, you should shade these places. And I'll go ahead and ask you to be thinking about why are these the places that Native Americans tend to live. I'll wait for people to think about that for a minute. So why? What's going on in these places that have above 25% Native American population? What's going on in those areas? Everett? Reserves. There's a different word we use. What do we use for the place that people of Native American descent were I was going to say given, but it's more like sequestered to these places. What do we call them? You guys not know what these places are called? Thank you. They're called reservations. I'm going to start just making people talk because anyway, these are they're mostly reservations, and mostly in the West because the Europeans pushed them there. Okay, so almost all Native people live in the West, and they mostly live on reservations. Has anybody ever been on an American Indian reservation? I mean, how many people have been to like Warm Springs in Oregon? There's the reservation there. Has anybody ever been to like one of the bigger ones? Like any other ones? Where have you been, Emma? Where? Oh, up here in Alaska. Now, see what you can notice about Alaska. Most of Alaska, at least the northern parts, and again, these are the parts where the Europeans just never went, have allowed, they left those places mostly for the native people. Most of this place is just wilderness, right? But yeah, there are some reservations there. There is a reservation right here. This is where the Navajo reservation is. So there's a big, huge reservation there. And then up here in Montana, how many people have seen I've seen the TV show Yellowstone? Anybody watching that? You're watching? You've been to Yellowstone. Yeah, but there's a TV show, Avery, you're watching it with who's the main character? It's what's his name? Kevin Costner. It's pretty good, but the idea, this clash between the people on the white people and the Indians is very much part of that story. So anyway, that's the reservation. So that's Native American, Native Americans. So now on the bottom, I was just curious and I found these slides. And I don't know if you guys can see these very well, but I'll just tell you, this is, I found these and I thought they were kind of interesting. It's the, this is the major American cities ranked by population of, and in this case, this is the number of Black people. So can you guys see what that says? What's the blackest city in the United States? Detroit. So what I thought you guys would do is just write down the top 5 cities for each race or ethnicity. Let's do that. So what's the top 5? Can you guys read it? Somebody else read it so I don't have to. What's number 2? Can you guys read it? Brooke, read one for us. Yeah, for some reason, I don't know why it says city after each word. Ignore that. It's just the city you've heard of. And I think it's to differentiate it between the county and the city, but it's Memphis. And then who can read the next one? Nolan, can you read the next one? You can't. Ryan, can you read it? Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore is number 3. Ben, can you read the next one? Atlanta is number 4. And Clementine, can you read number 5? Washington, D.C., the capital. By the way, if you look at the map, what do you note about at least 2 of them? I mean, most of those aren't in what we might think of as the South. That's partly because there's just not big cities in the South. But yeah, so the top 5 cities. By the way, if you want to know, I think this is kind of interesting. Where does Portland rank in terms of number of Black people? Can we find it? Can you guys find it? Oh, here it is, 38. So of the big cities, and these are the 45 biggest cities in the United States, Portland is 38. So not very many Black people compared to most of the rest of the country. Okay, what about next? Here's the white group. And who do you know? What do you notice about the top? Who's the white? What's the whitest major city in the United States? Portland, Oregon. Did you guys know that? If you travel enough, you probably notice that when you go to other big cities, you're like, wow, there's a lot more people of color than there are in Portland, right? Number 2, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Number 3 is Omaha. Sorry. Oh my goodness. I've thought for years this classroom is haunted. Now I have proof. Okay, what was I saying? So then the next one is Louisville. Louisville is number 4, and then Seattle is number 5. Number 3 is Omaha. Okay, next one. You guys get all those? Oh, by the way, so the least, and it's not somewhat surprising, but the least white city is Detroit. Miami, El Paso, a lot of cities in California and Texas are a lot less white than other places, but Detroit is the least white. Okay, let's look at, what is this one? Is this one Asian? Yeah, Asian, okay. What's the most Asian city? Can you guys read it? San Francisco. And what do you notice about the top 5? Where are all of them? California. So I'll just read them. San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento, San Diego, and Oakland. And then number 6 is actually Seattle, but then it goes, oh, and then New York City. But almost all of them are in California. And again, that's because of proximity. What's that? Yeah, Portland's, yeah, okay. So especially East Portland, there's quite a few Asians. Which Vietnamese restaurant do you work at, Avery? It's by what? Oh, okay. Because if you, no offense, but if you want to get really good Asian food, especially Vietnamese, I think you got to go to 82nd Avenue, kind of out by my house, which is out on the east side. Were you eating some pho soup? Good. Okay, now finally, this is Hispanic. El Paso is almost 80% Hispanic. Then you've got Miami, San Antonio, LA, and Fresno. Read them. Oh, yeah. You guys can't, especially in the back. I bet you can't. I don't have my glasses. Oh, here are my glasses. Yeah, El Paso, Miami. So El Paso, Texas, Miami, Florida, San Antonio, Los Angeles, and Fresno. How many people have been to Fresno? I've heard it's terrible. I don't know. I've never been there, so I'm not going to pass judgment. But there you go. Okay, and let's let's go ahead. No, 9:07. Let's take a break, folks. Take a break. And then we'll come back and finish up. I'd like everybody to go. Let's everybody come on. Luke, did you finish the test? Or did you still, you have to do part of it tomorrow.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. Well, I did lots of things that were fun. I didn't do anything exciting. Nothing like Hawaii, that's for sure.
Yeah, like anything interesting?
Anything
out of the ordinary?
No, not really. We saw lots of. I don't see a lot of movies, but my kids wanted to see different movies, so I saw like the Spider-Man movie. That was. Yeah.
So okay, I just now realized I was supposed to send in a call yesterday. Can I run to the office?
Take care of it, Brooke.
Okay,
you got to go to college.
Yes, I do.
What college is it?
Stanford.
Kind of a big deal. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about ethnicities in cities. So this is something, as living in Lake Oswego, it's a little bit, it's hard to kind of, at least for those of you who do, it's a little bit hard to kind of maybe think about ethnicities in cities because there's not really like ethnic neighborhoods in Lake Oswego, right? But in most cities there are. And so let's talk about those. So I've got a couple definitions. The first, well, here is just a map of, this is, crap. Now I'm trying to remember, I don't have what city this is. So this is kind of odd. Let's ignore that for now. Sorry. So we want to talk about something called ethnic enclave. So this is what is an area with high concentration of a particular ethnicity. And so sometimes this is often also thought of as there's another term that we've talked about where a lot of Jewish people live in Europe, but is a ghetto is similar. Now, I told you that the word ghetto should not have a negative connotation, although for the most part it kind of does with most people. So that's why I think it's important to not kind of necessarily think of it that way. But the word ghetto is kind of the same idea as an ethnic enclave. Now, I think people have moved away from using the word ghetto because it has that negative connotation, but nonetheless, that's the term that is often used. So, and this is true. There's ethnic enclaves in most American cities, not just American cities, but all cities around the world. And this kind of shows the different ethnic enclaves of Chicago. So you can see the blue is African American. The yellow is people from Mexico. There's Polish people. All these different enclaves in and around Chicago. So it's pretty common in large American cities. You can see right here, kind of in the middle, there's a Chinese group and that sort of thing. So to move on, and here in Portland, there's this area, and I think I've covered it up. Oh, this is called, this is along 82nd Avenue, where I was talking about where there are a lot of different restaurants and things like that. This is often referred to as the Jade District in Portland. And it's called the Jade District because it has a lot of many Asian Americans. And I'll tell you, in Portland, they primarily we're talking about mostly Vietnamese and Chinese in Oregon. Out in Beaverton, you'll have more Koreans, but in Portland, it's more Chinese and Vietnamese. Okay. Let's move on. So this is 82nd. Most of you guys probably don't get out that way, but every once in a while, if you're going out for some pho soup or something like that. So we're not going to look at that map. So here's a question. Don't write this down. This is just maybe to think about. Don't write this down. Ignore that. I mean, don't ignore it. But if and this because I can imagine this being, and in fact, I think it was a FRQ that I've seen before from the College Board. What if you're in, so remember, we're always talking, I always want you to be thinking about the cultural landscape. Like, what do things look like based on culture? So if you're in an ethnic enclave, like, what are the features? And let's do this. Why don't you guys real quickly get up and find somebody and tell them, because we're doing too much sitting, what are the features? What are some things, like if you're walking around an ethnic neighborhood, what are the things you see that make you know, okay, this is the ethnicity that lives in this neighborhood? Stand up, everybody stand up, find somebody and share that with them. Go, please, right now. Find somebody. Okay, go ahead and take your seats. I heard some people saying some great things, and I might pick on you if I feel like but I heard some things. And so why don't you guys share, especially with those people that I'm recording this for? I don't know if they can hear you guys. By the way, if that bothers anybody, let me know. Like, if you don't want, I don't know what I could do about that, but anyway, what are the things that we see? So I'm going to write these things down. Just throw them out. Okay, so businesses, I'm going to say catering to that ethnicity. And for example, like well, is there any specific business that might be specific to an ethnicity? Like, yeah. Okay, so things like, especially things like restaurants. In my neighborhood where I live on the east side of Portland, sometimes you'll see signs that say that this restaurant is halal. And I actually told you this when we were talking about this idea of food taboos. You see, hopefully you're starting to see how you know, everything we talk about kind of combines. Well, do you guys remember what halal means? What does it mean? For who to eat it? Muslims. It's good. It's okay for Muslims to eat it. And what's it? So if you see a restaurant says halal, you know that there's a lot of Muslims in that neighborhood. And Anthony, or sorry, Avery, what were you going to say? Restaurant. Thank you. This doesn't have spell check. So yeah. So you have things like halal or it could say or kosher. That sort of thing. Other things. So restaurants would be a great one. Yeah. Okay. So grocery stores. Whoops, that says grocery. What else? Riley, what were you gonna say? Absolute. Churches and houses of worship. You guys see again how we're combining this? So what if you were in a place where you had lots of Muslims, what house of worship might you see? Mosques, remember from last unit. Very good. Anything else, Jacob? Okay, architecture. Now this is going to challenge me. And then also signs and writing in I'm going to say in different languages. I feel like there was something else somebody said. I overheard them saying, but I'm not sure what it was. Is that most of it? Restaurants, grocery stores, architecture, houses of worship. I think that's probably good. I felt like you guys, I felt like Riley and Julia said something, but now I can't remember what it was. Oh, well, you could definitely say, like clothing, I'm going to say clothing on the streets, right? Just to like, what people are wearing. Right? So, Muslim communities, you might see women veiled and things like that, or in my neighborhood, there's a lot of East African women and they do wear headscarves. They don't veil so much, but they do wear headscarves. And I think the East Africans anyway, I think a little bit different maybe than some of the Middle Easterners. They have very bright and colorful dresses that are, cover their entire bodies. So that's kind of interesting. Now, this is and this doesn't apply so much to Lake Oswego, I think because most immigrant people can't afford to live here. But there's also another term you need to know. It's called an ethnoburb. So this is a suburban area with a high concentration of different ethnic groups, okay? So what is do you guys know in the Portland metro area any ethnoburbs and what ethnicity is thought of as being there? What ethnicity do you associate with like Hillsborough? Do you guys know? Or Woodburn? No, you guys don't know? It's Hispanic, okay? So there are a lot of Hispanic people in Hillsborough, a lot of Hispanic people in Woodburn. There's also a lot of Russians in Woodburn. There's a lot of Russians in Gresham. There's a lot of Koreans in Beaverton. Who else is out in Hillsborough because of Intel? Indians, people from the Indian subcontinent. So that's a good example. So it used to be they'd just be in the cities, but now suburbs have a lot of ethnic groups as well. Suburbs, they're where people can afford to live there. I mean, like immigrant people. So that's an ethnoburb. Okay, let's move on. So here's some here's a sign from Chinatown in Portland. And I don't know if this is school appropriate, but this is a famous sign. How many people have seen this sign in Chinatown in Portland? Anybody? Nobody? You guys haven't? You guys don't go down there anymore. Now it's scary, right? There's lots of people experiencing homelessness. This sign is from the area. How many people have seen the Chinatown gate in Portland with the lion statues and the big ornate gate? So that's old Chinatown. Now it used to be in Portland. That's also called Old Town. That used to be where the people of Chinese descent lived. Now they're all out in the J district on the 82nd because, well, one, Old Town, it has, it's not as appealing for lots of reasons. But there's this famous restaurant called Hung Far Lo Hung far. Why aren't you guys laughing? Do you want? No, I can't. Especially I'm recording this. What the heck? Anyway, I don't know. So anyway, this sign is interesting. That restaurant moved to 82nd because all the Asian people moved to 80, not all, but many Asian people moved to 82nd. And it was but they decided as a historical landmark, they would leave this sign. And so it's still there, even though the restaurant's not there anymore. They moved the restaurant and then they put the sign, another sign, a less cool sign, a kind of a lame sign out on 82nd Avenue. And now that restaurant's failed. It no longer, it's gone. So we still got this sign for this restaurant that's no longer exists, you know, in Chinatown, hung far low. So this is some examples. So you see this is Chinese language. These lampposts, these look like, they look like traditional Chinese ornamentation or architecture, that sort of thing. And of course you see gates like this. This is welcome to Chinatown. I don't know what Chinatown this is. This is not Portland. And it's not San Francisco, but I don't know. You see this in a lot of places, like up in Vancouver, Washington, they have one. I think they have them in lots of cities. Anyway, okay, let's talk a little bit about African Americans in the people of African descent in the Americas. So primarily, there was this the slave trade. The height was between 1710 and 1810. So about 10 million people were sold into slavery. And again, that is how the vast majority of people of African descent got to what is today the United States and other parts of the Americas. Okay. So, but here's what's interesting is when we think of the slave trade, we always think about the United States, or at least I often think about the United States, but the United States is not primarily where most enslaved Africans went. The vast majority of enslaved Africans went to the Caribbean and Brazil, okay? And they, you know, most of these people, let's see, yeah, they were going, but people worked, most people of African descent went to places with plantation agriculture because they needed, these plantations needed a lot of labor, and it was hard labor. Right? This was not the kind of thing that you could get the average person to do because it was very, very difficult labor. And by the way, especially in the Caribbean and in Brazil, do you guys know what industry, what crop they were working in mostly? Well, what? Poppies? No, oh, some coffee in Brazil, although I don't know how much coffee I don't think is very labor intensive. There's another, what? There might be some of that. The one I was looking for, and I think I heard somebody say it, was sugar cane. So sugar cane was the most noteworthy. But all those other ones as well. Coffee, in the US, it was cotton. So, but sugar cane definitely in the Caribbean and Brazil, some other ones. Somebody said rubber. And there was more, I don't know how much rubber, there was definitely rubber, but rubber doesn't take a lot of labor, as not nearly as much as things like sugarcane. The process of cutting down the sugarcane and doing all those things is as much different. But anyway, so that's a little bit about that. Okay, moving on. So here's a map that shows where, how Africans got to the Americas and who was trading them, but almost all of them came from West Africa and came mostly to Brazil and into the Caribbean. And then here, this is just a map of where people of African descent live. And so the vast majority of people of African descent actually live in, well, Africa, obviously, but also in Brazil and the Caribbean, and to some extent, the American South. But most of the people who are African live in, obviously, Africa, but also here in Brazil and in the Caribbean. Okay, so I put this on here. I'm not quite sure why. I'm just going to kind of skip over it. Well, let's look at this real quick. I don't have anything. I didn't write down any notes, but this says there's two diasporas. It's the by the way, you guys let's remind ourselves what is the word diaspora? And this is like the fourth time we've looked at this word, but for some reason, this is really difficult for people to remember this word. And it's mostly associated with the Jewish people, but we can also associate it with any ethnicity. What does the word diaspora mean? Jacob, what does it mean? A scattering, right? The scattering, and in this case, of a people. So there's lots of diasporas, but this one, can you guys see which one's this one? This is the Chinese and the Indian diaspora. So it's kind of what's noteworthy is, where are most of the Chinese people? Where have most of them gone? Where is this down here? What would you guys kind of collectively say? Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia and Indonesia. What do we call that area? Southeast Asia. So most Chinese have gone to Southeast Asia. And by the way, so there's huge Chinese populations in these places, and sometimes people, not all people in these areas necessarily appreciate that, but and then in East Asia and the U.S., and then we also have Indians mostly have moved to, and we've talked about this a lot. Where are some places, where would you say a lot of Indians have moved? Where's the diaspora of Indians? Okay, so also the US, but where else? What would you collectively call this area? Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain. We've talked about this place a ton. The Middle East, and particularly, we call these the Gulf states. And of course, we know that they are oil rich, and that Indians work in that industry, okay? But also Britain. And why Britain? Why Britain, folks? It was a former colony. And why South Africa? It was also part of the colonial empire, so it's easier for them to get to South Africa. And by the way, South Africans speak English and Indians speak English, or at least many of them. So there you go. Okay, let's move on, and let's see, what do I have here? Okay, so a little bit about migration of African Americans, and then we'll talk about something else. Well, actually, yeah, let's do this. So if we're still on page 21, so there's this idea of inter-regional migration. Okay, so remember this term, so we're bringing back terms that we've used in the past. Inter-regional migration, that's from, to be clear, that's from one region to another. Okay, one region to another. And so what happened, especially this happened primarily from the rural South into the cities in the North and West. And this happened mostly in the 1920s. Does anybody remember from history class what this was called when a lot of African Americans left the South? Anybody maybe from, no, okay, that's okay. This was often called the Great Migration. Okay, the Great Migration of African Americans who left the South and they moved into the northern cities. And you guys can see the map. And so that's how, that's why cities like, it explains, why, come on, explains, no. Why, like Detroit is, come on, why Detroit has so many Black people. So, and by the way, what was happening in the 1920s where African Americans could go, what industry was booming in Detroit? Auto industry, cars, right? Okay, let's keep going. So there's also intra-regional migration from the inner cities, ghettos to the outlying neighborhoods. So it was for a long time, especially in the 50s and 60s, that there were that the white people fled to the suburbs. And now what happens is Black people are also leaving to the suburbs. So there's a lot of this intra-regional migration from the center of the cities. Whoops, that's supposed to be intra-regional migration from the center of the cities into the outlying neighborhoods. Now, a lot of suburbs did not actually welcome African Americans. We know, and we'll talk a lot more about this in the urban geography unit. But nonetheless, there has been this move by a lot of African Americans out of the inner cities into the suburbs or kind of closer in neighborhoods. And actually, this is happening in Portland now a lot. But the reason for this is because the city centers are getting very expensive. City centers are getting super expensive. And so now lower income people have to move to the kind of outskirts, like, maybe like Gresham or Beaverton or places like that, because, right downtown, right in the cities, it's getting very, very expensive to live. Okay, so with that, I think what I want to do for the rest of class, and we only have 12 more minutes. I'm not sure if we're gonna have time, but I want you to get started on it. And I'm gonna ask you to do this start now. But on pages, you can't see them very well, but on pages 22 to 23, it's a short reading. It actually comes from your textbook. And again, I told you weren't reading this section of the textbook, but I'm going to ask you guys to do this. And this is a graded thing. And now you have 11 minutes, and I'm not sure if you can get through this. But what it is it's a comparison. It kind of talks about the United States. And if you've taken junior history in Lake Ridge, you've already learned about this. And if you've taken world history at Lake Ridge, you've also learned about apartheid. But I don't know how much time you actually spent like trying to think about the two of them and comparing them. So what I want you to do is read these sections, mark them up, identify important things. And then on page 24, I want you guys to do a classic Venn diagram. So here we go. Here, what you're doing is you're identifying things that are true of, and apartheid is the system that was in South Africa to separate the white people from the black people, but also people of Indian descent, what were called colored. So anyway, I'd like you to do that. Again, you have about 10 minutes. I would try to just get that done right now because it is a graded assignment that you can go ahead and work on. So I'm just going to sign off to the people who are, if you're watching this at home, this is what you should do, the Venn diagram. Read pages 22 to 23 and do the Venn diagram on page 24. All right. Bye-bye.